Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video we're going to be taking a look at how best to defeat this annoying Uncollected MOJO. And actually when you follow a few simple rules, he's a relatively simple final boss to defeat. It's just he really does require you to understand how the fight works and also kind of like being able to track a lot of different things on the screen, which is probably one of the more kind of like difficult things overall in the fight. But other than that, he's a relatively simple opponent to deal with. When it comes to nodes, there aren't too many annoying nodes. Only the main ones that you should kind of keep in mind is the recovery, that healing abilities are more effective, but he doesn't trigger heal that much. Also the fact that all power gain abilities lose 90% of effectiveness, and he basically alternates in between bleed and poison immunity, so it's probably best to avoid bleed or poison kind of like reliance. And last one is the Rising Sun, which is kind of like a mild form of Icarus, where you can gain fury buffs when you strike the opponent. You start to degen when you get 10 plus furies, and if you land a heavy attack you remove those furies. So it's pretty much kind of like a relatively soft core version of Icarus, because those furies are not nowhere near as potent. So that's pretty much all that he has going on for him there. And now we're going to take a look at MOJO's own abilities and figure out how to work around them. So with the next image we can see that MOJO works on prompts, and to put it short, it's pretty much the same thing as Taskmaster's perfect memory or whatever it was called. Basically, there is certain action that you get given on your screen HUD, and you have 8 seconds of either of you to complete it. So it does count for either of the champion. If you complete that action, he activates his anti-life field, and if you do not complete that action, then the prompt is failed and he loses a bunch of his subscribers or followers or whatever. And that is also a simple kind of idea. The more subscribers and followers he has, the more abilities he has. The more you make him fail that, the better for you. Again, it's important to keep in mind that it counts both champion actions, and it's also kind of completely random. Therefore, these fights are relatively RNG based on kind of what prompts you get, because some of them is pretty much impossible to avoid, like often taking a hit in a block and stuff like that. So it really depends which prompts do jump out. But if the prompt is completed, it's not end of the world. It basically just activates his anti-life field, and it's kind of like a new mechanic, new ability, which you can still play around with. And what this anti-life field basically is going to do, it decreases all your buff duration by 90%. So any buff you trigger that can expire will expire a lot quicker. And also it means every time a buff is expired or nullified on you while this field is active, you get a massive degen. And that's pretty much it. So if you can avoid having buffs on you to begin with, or letting him nullify any of your buffs, then you're safe, and auto life field basically does nothing. So there's still a way to play around it, and it's extremely important because in vast majority of the fights you will not be able to completely avoid triggering that auto life field thingy. And as I mentioned before, he basically works with the subscribers and followers, and they're kind of like this persistent charge and mechanic and thing where he gains new abilities the more followers he has. Basically at 1 million every time while his life field is active, if he nullifies a buff that not only plays the degen on you, it also helps him regen. Now he has 3 million, then he gains a bunch of power every time he completes a prompt. And if he has 5 million, then he basically places a buff on you, and that's really bad because that's going to give him something to nullify and keep triggering abilities. So you definitely do want to avoid that. And in order to do that, basically in between 1 out of 4 prompt activations, you just want to try your best to fail one. And that is kind of pretty much exactly what makes this fight RNG based, because if you receive 5 prompts in a row that are easily completed, by either you or your opponent, for instance, dash back. And if MOJO happens to dash back, that's a prompt completed. If that comes on a couple of times, and if there is like a block hit or a dodge hit and stuff like that, it's quite often pretty much impossible to avoid some of these prompts. Some of them are extremely easy to avoid. So you kind of need to keep an eye on which prompts get activated and which ones you can forcefully make him fail. And then quickly, before we jump into actual fight examples, we're just going to go over his special attacks. And the idea there is quite simple. The level 1 first hit has a chance to nullify, so you do not want to get hit by that, but it's the one special you want to bait out because it's not a projectile. So you can basically either block it or just evade it fully without triggering dex, or evade halfway. So that's extremely important because dexterity is one of the most kind of annoying things in this fight. And special 2, well, special 2 does trigger degen if you get hit. Additionally, it's a projectile attack, therefore you definitely do want to avoid special 2s for most part and try keep to baiting out level 1s. Obviously, you don't want to let him get to level 3, and that kind of pretty much completes the textbook part. So the idea in itself in this fight is actually extremely easy. With most champions, you just want to parry and heavy. Do not trigger dex if possible at all. Before we get to the rest of the fight examples and how to play around his abilities, for those of you who like Quake and can play Quake, should know that Quake works perfectly fine. There is nothing wrong with using Quake. Even a 4-star will do. You can simply do parry heavy thing. And yeah, because even if he does complete some of his prompts, since you do not really have any buffs expiring, you do not have anything to worry about degen wise, because dexterity won't expire unless you hit the opponent, and he will not be throwing his special attacks. And with that, it's just a relatively simple fight. You can kind of ignore most of his abilities. And now we're going to go in with the next champion example, and Captain America Infinity works extremely well. In reality, as I said before, this fight is pretty much largely just relying on parry and heavy attack. You do not want to trigger those furies just because they can get nullified, they can expire, and they can place a degen on you by themselves. So largely you just stick with your heavy attacks, do not trigger any buffs, bait out the level 1s, and that's fight in the bank. Because even if he has that anti-life field active, so long as you don't have any buffs on you, you have nothing to worry about, and you can play as normal. If you happen to get a buff on you, like a dexterity buff, while that anti-life field is active, which is represented by that green kind of like see-through poisonous icon looking thing there, then just don't hit him if you have triggered dex. Don't let that buff expire, or you can get a degen. Now here I make a mistake because I launched a special attack while his anti-life field was active, and special attack is not a heavy attack. And that, however, basically meant that I triggered the degeneration, because that fury, which the node, not MOJO's ability, the node gave me, expired, and I triggered degen. So that was a mistake on me, but as we can see, after that, we kind of like can recover ourselves and can continue playing around it. The name of the game still is, if we do not trigger any buffs, we don't have anything to worry about whatsoever. Sometimes it's kind of tricky not to get cornered. That's why also Cap is pretty much perfect for this fight, just because he can take a lot of block damage. Now again, I did trigger a buff on me and I launched special attack, but anti-life field was not active. Therefore, they did not expire quickly, and I had enough time to land a heavy attack and get out of the situation. But for most part, yes, just keep in mind, just do your parry heavies and you're going to be pretty much fine. When it comes to champion selections, vast majority of the champions work well, so long as they do not have buffs themselves. That's pretty much kind of like the main condition. So long as you do not trigger buffs, you're going to be fine. Now, some of these gameplay examples are going to be a bit sloppy, and because I was still trying to figure out the best ways how to deal with this guy, but in reality, it all came down to a very simple kind of method. Play conservatively, do a lot of parrying, just parry heavy, bait out level 1s, never push him to level 2. If you can, fail a prompt here and there. That's it. It's actually a very simple fight. Just don't take in anything that has buffs that expire. Don't get hit. keep to parry and heavy. And yeah, other than that, it's like a very simple fight. We can see here that I'm kind of like trying to play around with Sentinel. I'm failing here and there, but even with the relatively kind of like low amount of health, we're going to be able to stretch this fight out to a decent duration. Slowly but surely, we are building our analysis charges. I didn't feel confident enough to kind of start bashing his block all the time, so I just figured I'll let it build more or less naturally. Try and keep his followers as low as we can, and basically, yeah, again, you see parry heavy. There is nothing tricky in this fight. It will get annoying. It is seeming relatively similar to the way how you play Dormammu, to a degree that you kind of never want to trigger a buff. Fact of the matter is, you can trigger buffs as long as his anti-life field is not active, but if you have an active buff when he activates his anti-life field, you're still in trouble. So with dexterity, it's kind of a bit better because you can just not hit him until it expires, and then you can kind of like outplay the situation. But still, it's just much easier or better not to dex, not to trigger any buffs on yourself, and it's an easy kind of like maybe somewhat slow road to the victory, which is actually what kind of gave me an idea of a couple other champions that would work really well in this fight. But I just kind of wanted to showcase a bit longer gameplay of this Sentinel. Obviously it's still flawed, but you can see that with a very minimal amount of health, we're still kind of like making progress, we're dealing damage, we're not getting destroyed, we're playing around his abilities, keeping the followers to like that 1 million to the minimum basically, and we're good, we're fine. There I just decided to drop my level 2, and now we're moving on to the next fight. And in this fight is Void. And why Void? Because again, Void doesn't have any buffs himself, plus this fight is all about kind of patience and playing around these timers and prompts and waiting out this anti-life field. And Void obviously thrives on all of that, because you constantly deal damage even without hitting the opponent for the most part. So you just kind of like parry heavy, parry, bait out the level 1s, take some hits in the block if you have to. And as we can see, we're consistently making progress. So Void is pretty much perfect for this. And also, if you do happen to trigger that regeneration, then if you have enough debuffs, obviously you have your heal reversal, and it's gonna work out just perfect for you, because you're going to be able to reverse some of that heal as well. And yeah, so Void is probably one of the best counters for this guy. And before I forget, this guy is also a Mystic champion, obviously, and a villain. That means Blade will work fantastic against this guy, because you can trigger the Danger Sense, and you can just parry and make him bleed a lot. Now, half of the time he's bleed immune, but still, just the fact that you can kind of like parry and rely on a lot of damage from that, and drop your level 1s to gain distance, so on and so forth, is really amazing. So Blade will absolutely shred this guy. Another champion I wanted to showcase, obviously, is Wasp, because we're playing extremely parry and heavy, right? So since we're using a lot of heavy attacks, and Wasp does an incredible amount of damage with the heavy attacks, then it was quite obvious that she would be a really great option. Now, here I'm using only a rank 3 5-star Wasp. Obviously, it would be better if she would be somewhat higher ranked, because the block damage is shining through quite effectively. But at the same time, we're making a really effective dent into this guy by outplaying his abilities quite well, I would say, and we don't have like that much to worry about here. Now, we also got lucky here, because we got the prompt saying like hold block, and that's gonna be the perfect prompt to fail before he gets to 5k subscribers. And here we're just dropping our level 2, dealing a bunch of damage, again going in for that heavy, getting rid of all of those furies, failed his prompt, easy, got him halfway down, could carry on still in the fight. And another kind of like a bit sillier showcase is Namor, because you can just play aggressive and kind of go Hakuna Matata and try and reverse as much degen as you possibly can. Now, it's obviously not the best method, but as well, given how annoying this fight is, it might be just something it's quite fun to try. But finally, the last option obviously is bring in a champion that can hit really hard and just kind of like, for most part, weave in a heavy attack here and there and finish out the fight quickly. So yeah, obviously pretty much any champion that does a lot of damage quickly will work, because there isn't anything too particular stopping you from doing that. So as we can see here, we just weaved in one heavy attack, not to get that massive degen before we're ready to finish out the fight. But for the most part, you can just pretty much ignore the prompts, bring in anything that hits hard, like Domino with Red Hulk's energy or Corvus, and the fight is over. But all of that being said, that will pretty much do for today. I hope this video helped you guys out. If it did, do let me know. Hit that like button, hit that sub button. Obviously, there are many other options that would work perfectly fine as well. I was kind of trying to showcase how you should fight, maybe a bit more than what champions you should use. But either way, if you find this video helpful, hit that sub button, hit that like button, hit all the buttons. And I'm gonna catch you guys soon. See ya!